Guys, welcome to the video. In this recording, we're talking about how to add value to properties, how to force the appreciation of the asset, and how to not overspend when we're doing it. And I'm joined by YPN's resident expert in refurbishment, project management, one of the UK's leading experts in terms of refurbing properties for profit, for uplift. No stranger to the pages of YPN. So welcome, Martin Rapley.
Thank you very much. And it's really good to be here and really good to be speaking to you this morning on this little episode.
So, Martin, let's do a little bit of a sort of potted history. For people who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my background is construction. I originally left school actually now almost exactly 40 years ago and became a quantity surveyor working for a building contracting business. That's the person who looks after the finances. From there, I got into project management, rose up through the ranks of various construction companies, and it ended up with my own construction business. And the way things went, I just ended up with a lot of clients who were property investors and started engaging in property investing. I didn't really know anything about property investing in those days. And the one thing that kept coming out to me was these people don't really seem to know how to give me every opportunity to deliver a really good project. And it was a real eye-opener to realise that there were a lot of people that needed to work with builders that actually didn't know what I know, because I'd obviously grown up around tradesmen and builders for many, many years. And so in 2013, I wound up my building business and decided to become a consultant, effectively sitting as a project manager with property investors as my principal clients and smaller developers. I learned how to become a property investor as well through training through Simon Zucchi at the PIN organisation, and was delivering project management and quantity surveying for property investors. And then property investors started saying to me, Martin, we can't afford you on these smaller projects we're doing. If we're just converting a house to an HMO, there isn't enough margin to pay for a project manager. Can you teach us how to do it? Can you hold our hands? And I'd really got no intention of doing that, but actually that's actually really all I do now. I morphed into much more training and mentoring because it was just frustrating me how many thousands of pounds I was seeing people throw away for the want of a little bit of knowledge that I had, and I'd some experience that I'd picked up over the years. So that's where I am now, training and mentoring property investors that can't afford or are doing small projects that don't justify a project manager.
Okay, fantastic. So, UK's leading mentor on how to refurb and not get it wrong. And it's definitely easy to overspend on projects or make mistakes. I'm going to talk about some of that today. So, when we're talking about adding value, as property investors, that's kind of one of our key jobs, is to add value to the project. We're looking to force the appreciation of the asset. So we might buy something that's slightly distressed or something that has the opportunity to add value. And we have to spend, I don't know, let's say for every pound we spend, we want to increase the value by X amount over and above that pound. So, and it sounds like you saw property investors who were kind of making mistakes in that and perhaps spending money in the wrong areas or overspending or not quite getting it right. So where's the best place to start on this? Where should we start in sharing your knowledge and advice on how to do this the right way?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. And kind of 10, 12, 15 years ago, I think you could buy most rundown properties and probably add some value. But now with increases in stamp duty and building regulations being a bit more onerous, and property owners and estate agents being a bit more savvy about opportunities, I think we've got to be a lot more creative. We've got to be a lot more switched on. We've got to be a lot more aware with what we do. And really, the place I start with a lot of clients of mine is, what exactly are you trying to achieve? Just because the estate agent is marketing the property as run down and ideal for property investors doesn't necessarily mean that it is, or it might be, but it may not be your market. If you want to focus on students, then is this property going to be in the right location for students? Can you deliver what students actually need? So the whole thing really starts from having some clarity and awareness as to how you are going to add value, what you're going to get from this property. But with awareness, in a lot of cases, that now is quite hard to do if you're putting in a new kitchen and a new bathroom and painting it through. You've probably got to look for things. Easy end of the market would be converting one-bedroom flats to two-bedroom flats to gain the bedroom, converting residential houses into small HMOs to change, perhaps even changing the finance model on them and improving it that way. And then obviously going to grander things like extensions and garage conversions, loft conversions and things like that, which, you know, if I think back, if I'd really gone with that mindset 15 years ago, my portfolio would be way more valuable as an asset now. But at 15 years ago, when I first was tinkering and dabbling around this, it was just paint it through and put in a new kitchen, and it's gone up in value. But that's not the case anymore. So we have got to be a lot more savvy and, yeah, make sure that every decision we make adds value and don't just assume it will.
Okay, so should we start with one beds to two beds then? Because it's actually one of my favourite strategies and something I've done on a number of individual flats and then some blocks of flats as well. What are we looking for then? So we've got a one bedroom flat, and when I've done this, quite often what we're doing is it might be a Victorian property with a large kind of lounge area where that would become a kind of lounge living area with a kitchen in it, and then what had been the kitchen would become the second bedroom. Is that the common approach, or how do we see people doing that?
Yeah, that's exactly the place to start from. And the key thing here really is the logistics of relocating that kitchen. If you can literally move the kitchen from one side of the wall to the other side of the wall, that is obviously the cheapest way. But of course, if that kitchen already needs replacing, the extra cost of moving it to the other side is a little bit of plumbing work, a little bit of electrical work, and some repair where the tiles have come off in the other room. So you can't really get much cheaper than that. Whereas if it's not quite as easy just to flip it to the other side of the wall because of the layout, and you've now got some modifications and you've got some pipe work to box in because you can't get the sink waste out, then of course that very easy way of adding value could start to mount up a little bit. So it starts from having a look at the existing floor plans and getting some kind of understanding that it's even feasibly possible. Like you, Anne, this is a favourite strategy for me. The last project I did was exactly this, although we didn't actually move the kitchen into the living room in that situation, but it was very much from the floor plan, how can we easily relocate the kitchen? One side of the wall to the other is the first thing, or can you connect it up to the bathroom where you've obviously got water as well? Does that work? The one I've just done for myself, one bedroom flat, it had an enormous bathroom. For a one bedroom flat, it had a bath and a shower. I mean, it looked like a disabled bathroom, really. It was enormous. It had quite a large hall. So in that one, we actually made the bathroom down to a shower room. We put the kitchen into the hall and the rest of the bathroom. And actually, the front door now comes into the kitchen instead of into a hallway. And we created it that way around. But again, the plumbing was already there because we reconfigured the bathroom. The plumbing was there. And I see people saying to me, oh, I could just put it in the living room. And you say, yeah, but where does that pipe from the sink go? Look, there's a doorway in the way where you've got to connect that up. How are you going to make that work? And it's, well, we could put in a pump and we could do this. And I say, or you could just go and find another property. Cut your losses, because that's probably not the best one out there.
So can we talk through the numbers on your recent project then? Because it'd be really useful to understand. So, okay, what did this look like in terms of a purchase price, and then the conversion costs from a one bed to a two bed, and where do we end up with as an end value? It's great to learn on a real deal. So
Yeah, absolutely. So this was actually purchased as a block of flats. In fact, we purchased the freehold of a block of 4 flats and took 2 of the flats with it. So the other 2 flats have got long leases, although they are down closer to 56 years, something like that. So there's some value in upstairs as well. And we took over one of the flats, the basement flat or the lower ground floor flat, had scope for reconfiguring it. It already it was already uninhabitable. Although it did have a tenant in when we moved in it, it was uninhabitable. The electrics had been condemned. We knew it needed new central heating. It didn't need all the plaster off or ceilings down, but it was in need of a lot of work. And we worked out that the budget to do that work was circa 30 to 35,000 pounds, including sorting out some work in the garden because the fella had birds, so there were some aviaries left in the garden and all sorts of things out there that needed
That sounds
tidying.
lovely. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there was more to it. And because we bought the property as part of a block, effectively we paid £170,000 for two flats and a block. And the short leases were worth 10,000 of that or so. So it was a good deal for us. So very much so. Yeah, let's say the flats were bought for £80,000 a piece, and it needed about 30 to 35,000 pounds spent on the refurbishment.
Is that on the two flats or on one?
No, just on the
Just
one.
one.
The flat upstairs was reasonably good at tidy up. And the flat upstairs wouldn't reconfigure because it was on the ground floor level where the entrance hall was. So the footprint was that much larger. So we'd kind of bought it at the equivalent of about £80,000. We thought we were going to spend 30 to 35 on it. In the end, by converting it to two-bedroom flats, the final bill was a shade over £40,000. I couldn't quite bring it in below £40,000 in the end, and that got valued at £130,000. So it would have been 110 if we'd have left it as a one-bedroom. So not really adding on much, if any, margin, but as a two-bedroom, it was worth £130,000. And in reality, I'm not sure we could have refurbished it for the £30,000 to £35,000 budget in the end. I think it would have been 35 at least in there. So effectively, it didn't really make any money if we had only refurbished it, but by bring it up to two-bedroom, and we probably went a little bit beyond what we needed to do. But our market is probably it's high end. We're investing in Dover, in Kent, and we're looking for the high end market. Smashed the rental value of the property. Got more than anyone else really is getting in that area. Yeah, that shows the quality we got to. We could have done a little bit less on that, but
So
yeah, that was it.
what would it have rented as the one bed, and what does it now rent as a two bed?
So as a one bed, we might just have got 800. As a two bed, we got 950.
Yeah. Okay. So that small bit of extra spend in terms of the added whatever it is, £5,000 in terms of the reconfiguration is actually an additional 1,800 quid a year in terms of rent, and an additional uplift of 20,000-30,000 pounds from day one as soon as the works are finished.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could literally just look at the return on investment of that extra £5,000 spend. That's enormous in the scale of things, because it is about £150 a month just from that extra little bit of reconfiguration work, which really was moving or rebuilding two partitions, because everything else we needed to do in the first place.
And is this a common approach that you work with a lot of investors on now then, sort of having, concentrating on, say, do you know what, let's get another bedroom into this flat if we can do so?
I think I speak to more people who are still doing HMOs without any doubt. And of course, that's adding value. But I am talking to a lot of people that are doing flats and also houses. So it's not impossible to reconfigure the upstairs of some houses and create an extra bedroom. And of course, I always say to them, it doesn't need to be an enormous bedroom. We've got no minimum space requirements as far as what anyone might call a bedroom. And whilst we might call it a bedroom, some people would just see it as a little hobby room, as an office. So it doesn't need to be, an enormous space. If you want to call it a bedroom, you obviously need to get a bed into it. But you could call it a nursery and get a small child's bed in there. And of course, there's value to that as well. And someone looking to rent or buy a property that really can't quite afford a full two bedroom, but you're offering something that's nearly a two bedroom, just a little bit lower, could well be the opportunity that they're looking for. So, don't overlook houses where there's a reconfiguration upstairs as well.
Okay, great. And let's talk about HMOs because that's a large part of your business, working with investors who are, would they be buying existing HMOs and improving, or taking kind of standard houses and then converting?
I think that I'm seeing a lot of HMOs on the market that need improving. I'm seeing a lot of them being overvalued at the moment on a yield basis, which might be right today, but at some point it's all going to fall to pieces because it's not being maintained particularly well. So, and the biggest challenge I'm seeing with working on existing HMOs, aside from the fact that a lot of them are overvalued, is you're going to pay VAT on the building works at 20% on that. And some of these HMOs, you could easily spend £100,000 plus bringing them up to modern standards, particularly if you're going to start adding additional bathrooms. So I think the better market really is still converting family houses into HMOs. The VAT for those would be 5% only because you're creating additional dwelling space or additional dwellings for family units. So you've immediately got a 15% saving on the work. And some family houses, whilst it's hard to add value if you take a good quality family house, I think you still need to take something that's run down and in need of improvement. But of course, converting that to an HMO may not be anything more than just improving the family house, repurposing the existing rooms. You may choose to put in an additional an additional bathroom. At grassroots level, that might be all you need to do. Again, the additional cost of repurposing a family house that's already run down might be the cost of one bathroom, £3,000 or so, might be all you need. And now you've got a 6-person HMO. And of course, the build cost is 15% cheaper because you haven't had to pay 20% VAT on that works. I think that's the next level up, and that's where there are definitely still opportunities in the right areas. Obviously, probably avoiding Article 4 areas now, which is making it a little bit harder to find those areas, but always with the mindset of who is going to live in this property at the end of the day. Are you delivering what those people want? Don't try and bend something to work when it doesn't. And sadly, I talk to too many property investors who have bought a property and then they say, right, I bought this property. What shall I do with it? And it's like, that's the back to front way of thinking about it. You should be saying, is there a market for what I want to do with it in this area? If not, go and look somewhere else. Or are you happy to pivot your model to create that right property? But if you can create the property that someone falls in love with, they're going to pay you that little bit of premium, whether it's in rent or in purchase price.
Okay, great. And what's your view on kind of en suites? Because there's a lot of talk about, hey, I must have, en suite rooms in my HMOs. That's what I'm looking to do. Is that a smart way to invest? And what would that look like in terms of a per room basis, do you think, in terms of cost?
Yeah, so I think again it comes down to who your tenants are. I've got largely ensuite rooms, although I haven't got any property that is all ensuite. And that's partly because sometimes the logistics of getting every room ensuite are just far too expensive. If you were to build 2 walls in the corner of a room and fit it out as a bathroom and there was plumbing reasonably close, you're going to see change out of £3,000 for doing that. Whereas if you've got to run pipe work outside and dig a manhole and connect up the drainage underground, you could suddenly double that to £6,000, and yet the value of that room isn't perhaps worth that additional £3,000 spend. So that's why I've got mixed properties, and of course mixed properties is also brings different kind of tenants that can't quite afford ensuite. So we do mix them up. We've also got properties with what we call off suites, which isn't a standard phrase. I've used that phrase with estate agents before, and they've looked at me a little bit blankly because they don't understand it. But for us, an off suite is a bathroom that is a dedicated use bathroom allocated to a bedroom, but accessed through a different part of the house, normally through a hallway somewhere. We put locks on those doors so that the bathrooms have got sole use of them. And that will, of course, also add some value. But again, if your model is social housing, assisted living, those kinds of things, you may not need anything more than 2 bathrooms between 6 people, if that is just the right model. And it comes back to understanding what the model is and not feeling that you have to replicate what you're seeing other people do. What you've seen someone else do in a totally different town or city, brilliant. Absolutely, that's their market, but don't feel that you need to do the same as them. I ended up investing in Dover partly because there was no quality stock in Dover when we went there, and we said, right, there's a niche here. There's a small space for. There must be people who want quality stock, and that's what we set out to achieve. And even now, we haven't got a lot of competition. Most people are still at Magnolia and Brown, whereas we are a little bit higher. We're not necessarily, we're not in central London or Brighton. We're not at that level at all. We don't need to do that level, but we have got nicer rooms with nicer colours and slightly more space than some of the boxes that our competitors are offering. And that's reflected in the rents. We're getting some of the best rents in the town as a result.
Okay, and that's really interesting as well, isn't it? That you're identifying, niche in the market, in your very particular geographical market, and providing a product for that, and obviously understanding that there's a demand for that. I know where I am, there's a lot of very poor quality HMOs, very tired, very little quality stock. But we need to understand that there's a demand for that. So you obviously looked at that and said, I know there's people here who are going to be in kind of professional jobs or whatever. There is a distinct demand in my town or city for a more premium product.
Yeah, that was it. In fact, the first thing we did, the first property we bought was a family house, converted that into a 5-bedroom, although it's got sui generis planning on it because 2 of the rooms have now got double occupancy. That was more from a financing perspective. It increased the value. But the first one was a trial. Let's try it. And when we spoke to, we had one of those bridging products where they gave us a guaranteed exit finance. And they said, this is how we're going to calculate your exit finance based on the income from the rooms. And by the way, this is what we think it's going to be worth. And we said, that's not enough for us, but they haven't got any comparables apart from rundown HMOs. We subsequently delivered a top of the range HMO, proved the model because filled all of the rooms very, very quickly. And the lenders were happy to accept that those were realistic rents based on the product we delivered, and that on the basis that their comparables previous were nothing of that standard. So we kind of proved the model and then went out and replicated it more. Now, there's a limit to how much the town can take. We've got a couple of other competitors now, but the other thing that goes with the whole analysis is what's happening in the town. What are the economics of the local area? Dover obviously has got port, it's got huge transshipment, they're improving the cruise liner port, they're building a marina. So there's lots of external money. Someone has got to manage the cruise liner port, or there's staff managing. And we're very much looking for the managers. We're not looking for the people that are selling the tickets. We're looking for the people that are managing the people selling the tickets, and that's our demographic. So as a result, it's mostly people that are out all day. We haven't got anyone really on benefits. We haven't got anyone because they can't afford our rooms at that level.
Okay, great. And what would a standard poor quality room rent for compared to your more premium product that you were offering, do you think?
So when we took over one HMO there, and there were rents around about 350 a month. Those following our refurbishment, everything was well over 500, and we've now got rooms very close to 700. In fact, I think one is probably at 700. So that's over that one I'm referring to. We bought that in 2020, refurbished it through the chaos of everything in 2021. Had to pay a bit of a premium on that. That caught us out budget wise, but we've had that pretty much full since 2022 now, with the rent still increasing.
Okay, great. And let's talk about the other ways that sometimes people want to add value, do add value, or try to add value. So, I did an article or an interview a few years ago on loft conversions, and it can be really tempting to say, hey, I've got this space, I've got this space up here that I'm not doing anything with, and it might be used as just, chucking all our rubbish up there, as a lot of people's lofts are. What's your view on loft conversions? Do they make sense from a kind of financial perspective in terms of adding value? Have you been involved in many of those projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, we're likely to add value to properties if we can add more usable floor space. And as you say, there's an enormous amount of space up in the roof of, a lot of properties, particularly the Victorian houses, the Victorian villas, particularly some lovely space up there. I think the thing with loft conversions is you've got to go with caution. It's all too easy to say there's enormous space up there. Lots of other houses in the street have got loft conversions. I'll get on and do it. Usual kind of thing with a dormer on the rear so that we've got a large area with full head height and then obviously the slope to the front. First thing to acknowledge is that lots of those properties in the same street with loft conversions have been done as family houses. And the average family is not looking to add value. The value to them is mum and dad have now got another bedroom and the children have got separate bedrooms as a result, or we've got an office. They're not saying, oh, I'm going to convert the loft because I can make some money from it. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a sustainable thing. There was a time, 10 plus years ago or so, where you could convert a loft for 20 to £25,000 in most parts of the country, a little bit cheaper in the cheaper parts of the country. Building regulations now are way more onerous, particularly relating to insulation. So loft conversions are getting more expensive, and it's hard to do a full loft conversion for £40,000 now. And I'm seeing some where there's bathrooms and maybe 2 rooms up there, so larger areas, which are creeping up towards £60,000. And in some areas, you're not going to add on that kind of value. You will in some areas, but not everywhere. So you've now got to weigh up if you're doing this for a longer term investment perspective, it's then got to be recovered from your cash flow. And I'm seeing a lot of investors converting lofts and getting 2 bedrooms and sometimes even a bathroom up there. I'm working with someone at the moment who's got 2 bedrooms and a bathroom up in their loft space. It may not be adding much value, but of course, from a cash flow perspective, it's massively improving the cash flow on that property. So what I've seen over the years is an acknowledgement that you've got to almost weigh up, do I want to add value to my property or do I want to get cash flow from my property? Whereas a long time ago, everyone wanted to just add value and refinance and that utopia of getting all their money back out, there's now a lot more acknowledgement that that is becoming harder and harder. So a lot of people are wanting their money to work hard for them. I know I'm going to leave some money in this deal, so let's have it work harder, in which case I could leave in £20,000 and generate this amount of cash flow. But for a little bit more spend and getting something with a loft space, I'll leave in a bit more money, but my cash flow is much, much higher as a result. But yeah, so again, it's about going in with your eyes open that it's not that quick fix that it used to be. And we of course see lots of properties on the market on a regular basis where there is what looks like a room in the loft is not being marketed as a loft room, or it's called a loft room. It's not called a bedroom. And the clue there is normally it was a cheap conversion many years ago, possibly a DIY type project, and it is not going to be compliant for anything that we need to use it as. With tenants, we need to know that it's safe, that it's not an uninhabitable space as far as it's far too hot in the summer, far too cold in the winter. The staircase isn't too steep to get down if there was a fire or things like that. So you can't get away with what some property investors were probably doing 30 years ago. That just doesn't work anymore.
So would you be kind of looking at these projects with investors? Let's say it's an HMO and they say, hey, we could get another 2 rooms up in the loft here. And we might know, and most people, if they're operating in an area, will know an average value per room. So they might say each lettable room in this property has a value of £50,000 or £60,000, whatever that would be. And would you be then crunching the numbers saying, well, actually, okay, this loft conversion might cost you 40 grand or 45 grand or whatever it's going to be. But in doing so, we're creating two extra rooms with a value of £50,000 each. So we can immediately see a 50k uplift from creating those two additional spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, the success of any project starts at the beginning and understanding the numbers, the likely end value, the anticipated cost of delivering that. And one of the exercises I do with a lot of my clients is let's look at multiple different schemes. Let's look at the scheme of just taking the existing loft space without building a dormer on it and getting one bedroom. Let's look at the pros and cons of that. Let's look at the next one, putting the dormer on the back and actually getting two bedrooms and a bathroom up there. And of course, for me, every client is different. They've all got different reasons for investing. They've all got different access and availability of funds. It's all right saying, do you know, you could maximize the value if you did X, Y, Z. But if that means that they've got to find another £50,000 and they haven't got that in their pot ready to go, that means that may not be something worth considering, although it could be something to say, well, there's another scheme there. Perhaps in 5-10 years time, if you own the property in the longer term, you have got scope for converting the loft, so that might make it a better proposition now. Whilst you can't necessarily afford to do the whole scheme now, it could be a better proposition now. And really, this all comes back to, you can only buy the right property now if you've got some kind of longer term plan, longer term knowledge, and have done some research as to what those end values are going to be. I can help clients work out the budget for doing the building work in most parts of the country. My brain works in home counties prices. And then we kind of say, well, in these areas, it might be a little bit more expensive, a little bit cheaper. And I can work on those prices. But the thing I can't do quite so well is understand the likely end value. That really comes down to knowing your own area. I know where I am in Kent. I know where I am, particularly in Dover. But talking to people in other areas, that's about them understanding that there is a market, and to some extent not relying on hope value. I hope I can get a little bit more than next door because I'm going to paint it a nicer colour. That's the kind of mindset that backfires eventually, because the valuer doesn't see it, that nice colour that you've painted it has added any value at all. It's just a coat of paint. So don't go into anything without having some kind of idea as to where you're getting to at the end is the key thing. And sadly, there's still people out there that come to me. I found this property. Well, I've bought this property. I bought it because the estate agent told me it was a really good deal, and it was going to be worth a huge amount more when it was refurbished. And sadly, people still do that and don't do any research or take any advice.
So is this where you see the difference really between kind of professional property investors who make this work and the kind of amateurs who come in and just think maybe they're still stuck in a mindset of 15 years ago where I just need to make this thing look pretty and it'll be worth more?
Yeah, without any doubt, the market is diverging between those that are wanting to get it right, who are my clients really, and those that are thinking I can throw some money at this and make it work. And for me, those people that can throw some money at it and make it work aren't the people that will even pay for my services, because their mindset is, well, I've got a paintbrush in the shed. I can make this work and make some money from it. And, some of them will. Absolutely, they will. Is it sustainable? Possibly not. Are they continually repairing things because they bought the cheap doors and the cheap door handles and they've got poor quality tenants as a result? And it all just becomes a vicious circle. Whereas really everything I'm trying to get across is that the very much spend a little bit more, you will get better value. Your asset will hold its value and hopefully go up in value over the times. Many, many years ago, when I was working for building contractors, we used to do a lot of work for the local authorities from the days when they had enormous stocks. And the one thing we saw them doing was actually maintaining their properties. They would cyclically redecorate their properties. They would replace the carpets for tenants. Even if the tenants were living there long term, they were spending money. If there was a problem, they were encouraging their tenants to report that there was a leak. There's a tiny stain on the ceiling needs looking at, rather than the ceilings falling down. And really, that should be the same with us now. So we need to be converting to a decent standard, refurbishing to a decent standard, using quality products, and then we've got an asset that really should grow in value over the years that we hold it. But it's just as important to look after it in the longer term. And sadly, there's lots of people that aren't thinking with that mindset. They're not my clients. They're the people that think they can budget and get away with it, and they will do for a while. And yeah, good luck to them. That's their model, but that's not really where I think it's sustainable for the long term. And I'm sure they're not the people reading YPN magazine. Yeah, they're the ones that think they can make a quick buck and sail off to the sun.
And can we talk a bit about extending on the sort of ground floor as well, creating kind of more floor space there, or adding value by improving the outside space as well of properties? Or have you, what have you seen that works particularly well when people are, extending on the ground floor?
So, well, just before going to extending, the really easy way of adding some value of the ground floor of some properties is actually to convert a garage. A garage can make a nice habitable room. It's big enough to be an HMO bedroom in that situation. And an integrated garage, so that's where there's already a room over the top of it. So you've seen these houses where the garage is part of the ground floor. They're relatively cheap to convert, £15,000 or so, and can add a lot more than double that in value because it's relatively straightforward. And if you haven't got a lot of experience of doing building works and managing builders, that's a nice little entry level project that's fairly low risk and should add value. As far as building extensions, under permitted development, we can build single-story extensions to the rear of properties, 3 metres on attached properties, 4 metres on detached properties. We can go further, but it gets a bit more complicated with planning. We can build extensions on the side of properties up to half of the width of the existing house under permitted development. And again, if you're relatively new to this, you probably don't want to be going down the realms of the route of getting full planning permission. There's definitely risk attached to that, even on fairly vanilla schemes that we would think wouldn't be a problem. There is definitely risk at the moment with anything with planning. So look for permitted development. But yeah, ground floor extensions can be good. Be careful building ground floor extensions on the rear of properties because you will end up with rooms in the middle that haven't got windows and natural light. With HMOs, you can have kitchen, living rooms that go front to back or partially front to back. But if you're looking at carving it up, I worked with someone years ago who bought me a floor plan and said, I'm going to build an extension here and here, and then I've got all of these bedrooms. And I said, but this room in the middle has got no value. You can't use this as a bedroom. It's got no windows. His whole mindset was, I've just got to create lots of space, not how am I going to create usable space. So do just watch that with extensions. That's even harder upstairs. Downstairs, obviously, we can have kitchen, diner, living rooms that are big open plan spaces. That doesn't work with bedrooms upstairs so much. But yeah, I would say building extensions is absolutely. I think sometimes building extensions are probably a better thing to consider than loft conversions. Loft conversions are probably a little bit more money. There's a little bit more logistics needed there. The rooms are often compromised with sloping ceilings. You'll get better value building things at ground floor level. So I tend to say, look at ground floor extensions ahead of loft conversions.
And in particular, it sounds like, garage conversions can make a great way to add value because we said earlier on, that a room may have a value of, let's say, £50,000 on a property, but it's only £15,000 to convert this thing into a really nice, livable space. So, we're kind of, for every pound spent, there's kind of £3 added in value. Do you have any kind of metrics like that where you're saying, do you know what, actually from your own portfolio, from your own investments, for X amount of spend that I'm looking for, I want to uplift by a certain amount?
I haven't really got those metrics because of where I'm investing. I have to be really careful about what does actually add value because although I'm investing in Kent, I am investing in one of the cheapest parts of the county, and so I think this is one of the other mistakes that investors make: the assumption that someone else I know added value. They did this and added value. Don't assume that's the case in your area or even your part of the town where you're investing. As we know, towns have got different demographics around them, and you won't always add value. But I would say most of the time you'll add value from a garage conversion. A lot of the time you will from an extension. But yeah, be very careful in the very cheap parts of the country. You won't add value. And the connection here is, in those parts of the country, you'll find that developers aren't really building anything, because it costs them £120,000 to build a two-bedroom house, and it's only worth £80,000 when it's finished. That's why no one's building an area. And in many respects, that's why if you build an extension and it costs you £30,000, it might only add on £20,000. I'd be very careful of rules of thumbs like that, because it can come down to even a street in an area. And I'm sure we all know streets in our investment area where we could deliver, we could build a really nice house for £400,000 that's worth £600,000, but just round the corner it doesn't work because it's the wrong area, it's the wrong part of the town. Um, so yeah, I would say anything we're looking at to add value, whether it's just going from one bedroom to two bedroom flats at the grassroots level, we need to run the numbers and be really sure, because in some areas it still won't work.
We see it all the time, don't we? People, property investors, particularly when they're new, get attracted to very cheap areas because on paper the returns look like they're going to be great. You know, let's say I can buy a house for £50,000 or £60,000, and that may work well in terms of the rent that you're getting being a good return on that investment. But there's very much a ceiling price in those areas, and they may be areas with historically very low capital appreciation.
Yeah, understanding the end value is significant, and don't believe what the estate agent tells you. When the estate agent says one of these houses well, I sold one round the corner, fully refurbished for this amount of money. Well, go and see where it is. Is it actually on the same estate, or is it the other side of the railway line? It might be very close, but it's in a different area, closer to other facilities or whatever. You've got to do your own research. I'm reminded of lots of sources kept sending me this same development opportunity not far from where I live. And they were saying, oh, this is a brilliant development opportunity. You can't fail to make money from it. There's properties 100 yards away selling at over £1 million. And you can create 4 flats here in the 6 flats in this development. The piece of land is only £300,000. And, look at how much money you can make. And I said, I know the area. I know that plot is right on the roundabout of a main road. And those £1 million properties that are selling, they are in a gated development with luxury, top of the range luxury. It includes a health club is in this development. It is absolutely not comparable at all, even though it's only 100 yards away. It's not on the main road. I knew that because I knew the area. If we don't understand where our investment area, we can very easily be buying that property, shiny pennies. There's £1 million profit in here. There absolutely wasn't on that deal, because it wasn't like for like. I remind everyone, an estate agent's job is to sell the property at the best price for their client. Their client is not you. So they'll tell you whatever they think you want to hear. Yeah, you'll refurbish this for 50, and when it's all done, it's worth £200,000 more. If they think that's what you want to hear and you lap it up, then unfortunately that's how you'll end up with the property, paying too much in the first place or not getting the value you were expecting.
And do you have some sort of particularly interesting examples of clients that you've worked with who've done some sort of innovative things to add value, things that have worked really, really well in their particular areas that we can from?
I suppose the more innovative things is very much about looking creatively and how can you add value in as many ways as possible. So I started off this interview saying that back 15, 20 years ago, a coat of paint and a new kitchen and bathroom would add value. Well, that will add a bit of value now, but that hasn't covered the extra stamp duty. So now we've got to find more. And the schemes I'm seeing that are successful within residential is very much, well, we're going to reconfigure it, and we're going to do a loft conversion, and we're going to do a side extension, and we're going to do a rear extension. And with all of those ways and a creative exit, as far as we've got a service provider that says we provide this, 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 and this, and we've tailored it to suit that market, then that's where we've got the maximum value. So I think, yeah, you've got to look at a lot more ways of adding value now. And that's the same if we're looking at, I'm talking to a lot of people that are doing commercial to residential conversions. Again, how can you deliver more than anyone else? Where is the value? And in commercial to residential conversions, it is about looking which is the better aspect of the property. Which way do you want the property looking when you're sitting in the living room? Are you looking over the industrial estate, or are you looking over the park? Being smart with things like that, and don't necessarily just assume that every architect is going to deliver that. But what are the minimum space standards? A one-bedroom flat delivered at the minimum space standards, circa 37 to 40 square meters, is not going to value up any less than a one-bedroom flat that's at 45, 48 square meters, and yet the 48 square meter one is going to cost you more to deliver. So you've got to be a lot more, you've got to be not just creative, you've got to be more analytical now to make those best deals. But really, yeah, the people I'm working with are doing more to add more value, but also pointing out that might not be right for everyone, particularly if it's your first scheme. Look for simpler things with your first scheme, and still look for creative ways into the deal. Look for things like exchange with delayed completion, where you can reduce your initial investment, or you can reduce your financing costs. So bringing everything together. When I talk to people in property investing training scenarios, and I work with some of the property investor trainers, I always say to them, what I'm teaching sits alongside all of that creative stuff you're learning and using already. Bolt as many things together as you can, and that's where the opportunities will come from.
Okay, fantastic. Well, what a great place to kind of, sum up, and draw to an end this interview. It's been really interesting just talking through the different ways, the different approaches of adding value. Before we end, is there anything we've missed? Is there any top tips that you can give people when they're looking at this, saying, I want to get as much bang for my buck as I can in terms of adding value?
Well, yeah, just one other thing to focus on is a lot of people say, oh, I've got a basement I could convert. I'd say be very, very careful converting basements. They are much higher risk. They can end up costing way, way more than anticipated. And sometimes you won't find that until you start the work. The risk with basements is you can end up having to excavate the floor down, and then all of a sudden you have to underpin the building, and that will kill any deal. So I would say in most cases, basement conversions aren't worth considering. Yeah, I mean, it's centre of London, the West End of London, we know they were building double depth basements and bonkers things like that. But in most of our investment areas, basement conversions aren't really worth considering. So keep away from those without taking some more expert advice, really.
Okay, fantastic. So really, basement conversions, definitely something we need to think very carefully about, because they may cost way more than we think. We can encounter problems that we hadn't anticipated, and we may just not get those end values at the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Always look at lofts ahead of and extensions ahead of basements, because basements with rooms like HMOs, we have to consider getting people out. So now we're digging a light well, and have we got space for that? And how do we stop people falling down the light well? Now we need some railings, and we've got a car sitting on the drive. How do we stop that collapsing the light well? Now we need a retaining wall that's designed by an engineer, and it all just runs on. Oh, and by the way, the room's not worth quite as much because it's a bit dark and dingy down there. So yeah, go very carefully with basement conversions.
The top three mistakes that people make when they are refurbishing property. So Martin Rapley, we've just done an extended interview on how to best add value, but let's jump in and say, where do people get this wrong? What are the common mistakes that people make when they start refurbing property for profit?
So the first mistake is right at the very beginning. They've bought a property that's run down. And that's it. The assumption that it's run down and I can make some money from this is just an assumption. And they really need to be doing more more research into the end market, looking at their budgets, understanding the end development value of that property, rather than believing an estate agent that said, "Here's a rundown property. It's ideal for property investors," and then making an offer probably 20 grand below what it's on the market for and crossing their fingers. That doesn't work.
Okay, great. And even assuming that we've done our due diligence, we know how, we know that if we get this right, we're going to add the value. Where do people go wrong in terms of, hey, maybe like working with builders? How can that go wrong?
So the first thing that goes wrong with working with builders is they don't actually take control of the delivery of their project. And the thing that builders need to be able to give you a quote is actually clarity as to what you want that builder to deliver. Now, you may have given the builder some drawings. You might have some drawings from an architect that shows you an extension or a loft conversion, but those drawings only show enough to comply with the building regulations. You, as the property owner, need to take some responsibility for explaining what your property is going to be. What does your ideal client, be that a tenant, a guest in serviced accommodation, or an end purchaser, if you're flipping, what do they actually need? And therefore, you need to set that out. Now, that goes into kind of, if you're sitting in a room at the moment, what is everything in that room that has got multiple options? Lots of different styles of doors, door handles, different styles of radiators, different colours we can paint the walls, different things we can put on the floor. We've then got kitchens, lots of different styles in kitchens. Bathrooms, are we going to tile the walls in bathrooms? Are we going to use shower panels? Are we going to just do the showers and a little splashback, or are we tiling floor to ceiling? You shouldn't be leaving, or property investors shouldn't be leaving any of those decisions to builders, because that's how we end up with cheap products and magnolia walls. And ultimately, if you're asking builders to make decisions, the best builders are not going to want to work with you. The best builders want a schedule of work, some kind of specification. They know they're in competition, but they know that they're in a fair competition because their competition has all got that same document that sets out what your end goal is. And of course, if you know what your end goal is, they've got every chance to deliver it. If you don't know what your end goal is, then no one's ever going to be happy at the end, because no one really knew what anyone was aiming for in the first place.
Okay, brilliant bits of advice here. And the other one I wanted to ask about as well is, where do you think it goes wrong kind of mid-project with builders? Thinking sometimes we as property investors, we change our mind midway through. We don't factor in a kind of an increase in budget. We're just expecting, suddenly, oh, I was going to do this, now I'm going to do that. Is that a problem?
Yeah, builders will expect there to be some changes. They naturally, and we're all the same, we dislike change after we've done something. So, well, I've just painted the whole house blue and now you want it red. That's a bit of a negative kind of thing. But they expect things to come up. They expect to take out the kitchen units and find that the floor's a little bit rotten and then there's some extra work to do there. And yeah, we can agree the right price for that. But when you say things go wrong midway through the project, I would say a lot of the reasons for those problems actually was caused much, much earlier on. Because one of the other mistakes I see people making is they don't take enough time to find the right builder to work with. And the right builder isn't necessarily always price driven. It's who's available, who can deliver to the right quality. And importantly, who is the person that I believe I can work with? I talk to so many people, they say, well, I met 3 builders there. One of them's gone on holiday. One of them hasn't given me a price, but I've got a price. It's really, really cheap and he can start on Monday. So off he goes. And 6 weeks later, it's all broken down. He hadn't priced it properly. We didn't like him anyway, but he was the only one who gave us a price. So to minimize or reduce those issues mid build, you've got to spend more time finding the right builders in the first place. And if I don't always tender my projects competitively. A lot of the time I'm working with the same couple of builders, and whilst they don't necessarily know that they're not in competition, and I will sometimes get some competitive prices, but when I was working with clients, if I wanted 4 prices, I was probably talking to 12 builders. A couple said they weren't available. One didn't do that kind of work. One, I wasn't sure about his quality. So I'm now down to perhaps 8. I've spoken to them a little bit more. I've looked at a few things. Yeah, I'm not sure about a couple of them. So let's get 6 prices. From 6 builders, I might now get 4 prices. From 4 prices, I've now got a chance of finding the right builder to deliver my project. So that would be my other bit of advice. You will avoid a lot of the later problems by slowing down a little bit in the early days, just spending a little bit more time talking to more builders, engaging with more builders, meeting more builders, checking that you've got the right builders in front of you. And probably, not always, but a lot of the time, I'm not engaging the cheapest builder. For me, I want a builder that can turn a project around quickly to a good standard that isn't going to break later on. And if I want someone to do something quickly to a good standard, I'm probably going to have to pay a little bit of a premium. But I personally would rather do that than be stuck on bridging for ages because they're really, really slow, or have properties delivered to a poor quality that are cheap, but as a result, they're continually breaking. And now I'm paying a premium for a handyman to go into an occupied property and continually fix it. So price is a little bit less of a driver for me.
Okay, great, Martin. Thanks so much. 3 brilliant bits of advice there on getting it right right from the outset when we're refurbing properties for profit. Thank you.
No worries at all.
Okay, fantastic. Martin, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with our readers and anyone watching this video. I know we're going to get some contact details into the article, but if people want to learn about, reach out, learn more from you, make contact, see if there's a way to work together. Can we get a link or somewhere that they can get in contact?
Absolutely. So my business is Refurbishment Mastery. Refurbishmentmastery.com is my website. There's a link at the top that says book a call. You're welcome to book a free 20-minute call with me and we can have a chat about what you're doing. Also having a look on Facebook as Refurbishment Mastery. Podcasts, I've got the Refurbishment Mastery podcast, and there's also some videos on YouTube. So lots of free content out there to help you get started. And I'm here to get involved with some of your more complicated projects and guide you from my 40 years experience.
Fantastic. Martin, thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Anne. Great speaking to you.
Experience is the best teacher, but it doesn't have to be yours. Learn from others' property journeys at ypn.plus.